Hello, this is Brian and Amanda from WVGamers, and we have Batterystaple Games with us to discuss their upcoming game, 30XX. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with us today. Based on what I've read, 30XX may be coming out next year. Is that correct?
Yeah, we haven't talked about a specific release date yet. We're definitely going to do the whole early access thing. Community feedback is super important to us. So 30XX is a sequel to our previous game, 20XX, and a lot of the reason 20XX was great, a lot of the reason we get to make a sequel at all is because of our relationship with our community and the incredible feedback they've given us over time. So early access will probably be sometime early next year for 30XX, but we haven't really nailed down a specific date yet.
Nice. So obviously you're a Megaman fan, otherwise this creation wouldn't have came into being. How long ago was it that you decided you wanted to make a project like this?
Wow, that's a great question. So it sort of depends on how you measure. I would have loved to have made a project like this ever since I was a little boy, experiencing these games for the first time. As soon as I got hooked on Mega Man 2, I've always sort of loved this kind of really crisply controlling action experience that, the character does exactly what you want it to and sort of feels just really good to play. We started making 20XX back in July of 2013, so 7 years ago now, which is horrifying to say and makes me feel old. Um, but that's fine. We've known we wanted to make a game like this for quite some time before that. 20XX was our first commercial project. I started it when I was in my late 20s because it was the first time in my life where I had both had some amount of savings because I'd been out of college for a little while, and no, wife or children who would be really upset or potentially harmed if I wasted all of my savings doing something dumb like trying to make a game and selling it. And so 20XX was born. But in terms of where exactly I really developed that urge, that need to make a game like this, it's hard to say. In some respects, it's from directly from my childhood, and in other respects, it's as soon as it became reality that I could actually pull the thing off in my late 20s.
Nice. Yeah, Mega Man 2 was also my first experience into the whole Mega Man world, and Mega Man 2, I don't even know how many times I beat that one. I played it over and over, and then once I kind of got into the X series, where they added in all the additional movement capabilities and whatnot, it just made a perfect formula. So,
Oh yeah, give me that dash.
oh yeah.
So with the 20XX, like I had seen where it was originally on Kickstarter, can you explain like how your Kickstarter went since it was 7 years ago when Kickstarter was kind of
Yeah,
a brand new thing?
absolutely. So our Kickstarter period, the game it wasn't even called 20XX yet. At the time, it was actually still called Echoes of Eridu because we thought the narrative was going to be sort of deeply rooted in Sumerian myth. Unfortunately, nobody knew what an Eridu was, and when you say the name, this is Echoes of Eridu, nobody would have any idea what words had just come out of your mouth. So remembering the name of your game was kind of difficult. So we eventually changed the name to be something a little bit more evocative of this kind of action platformer, and that's kind of how we landed on 20XX. But Kickstarter was honestly, it was one of the most stressful months of my life. We were a very low profile game. We were basically we didn't we hadn't really put up a Steam coming soon page. We hadn't done any of that stuff. We put up a Greenlight page back when Greenlight was a thing to go along with our Kickstarter campaign. We did both of those things in conjunction with showing at our first ever PAX. It was PAX East 2014 in Boston 6.5 years ago. We had a relatively modest goal. It was a $20,000 goal. We knew it didn't cover all of our expenses, but we knew it would cover some of those expenses, and we thought it was a pretty reasonable goal for us to set. And honestly, it was, I mentioned it before, but it bears repeating. It was such a stressful month for us because we were towing the line between project success and failure for literally the entire month. We had a decently strong start, and then we kind of petered away for a while and had kind of a quiet couple of middle weeks, and then we had a nice surge at the end that got us basically barely over the goal. The day the campaign ended, we were at, I think our goal was $20,000, and the day the campaign ended, we were at 20.5 thousand, and with less than an hour to go in our campaign, one of our very lovely backers who still ended up pledging $100 reduced his pledge from $500 to $100, which for just a moment dropped us from a healthy lead of a couple $100 over our goal to like just barely skirting the goal, because I guess the backer decided that if we were going to make our goal, he had really only put in additional funds to make sure we crossed our goal. And now that we were comfortably over it, he was going to, be a little bit more conservative with it. I totally respect. But it happening in the last hour of our campaign and sort of threatening to drop us back under our campaign goal was very terrifying. It was indie games are a terrifying business to be in. It's definitely a difficult spot to be. And when we were first kind of getting our start, that Kickstarter campaign was our first really public play. Like we hadn't done a bunch of marketing leading up to then. We hadn't announced the game. We hadn't shown it anywhere. All of that was kind of first stab stuff, which is obviously stuff we wouldn't really repeat again. But yeah, that was a tough month. The amount of physical and emotional stress during that month was enough. Well, not physical stress. The amount of stress we went through for that month was a big chunk of why we didn't bother with a Kickstarter for 30XX. It's a tremendous amount of work. It's a lot of emotional investment.
I can imagine that would be pretty stressful. I'm actually getting ready to help a friend in October with the Kickstarter campaign for his first board game. So hopefully
Nice.
we'll see how well that goes. Hopefully we'll go through as many of the pains, but I'm sure we will.
Yeah, I'm sure there are ways to do it better and worse. I think tabletop has enjoyed a little bit more longevity on Kickstarter compared to the average video game project. Obviously, stellar projects can stand out regardless of medium, but tabletop has done pretty well in Kickstarter in the last little while.
That is true. So once you shifted the kind of the feel of the game to the whole 20XX and 30XX, was there ever a point in time that you feared that Capcom's lawyers would be coming after you because it felt a little too much initially like Megaman?
It's a good question. So we, yes and no. So when we first started making 20XX, it was never our goal, never our ambition to. So we spent between day one of the 20XX project and when we shipped on consoles a year after PC, all that considered, we spent about 5 years making the game. We never thought we'd spend anywhere near that much time making 20XX. When we started, I thought we were going to make something for about 6 to 12 months or so. And then I was going to use the project as kind of a portfolio builder, a resume item for me to build our own custom C++ engine. Look at this cool thing I made. It's out on Steam. It's all great. And I was going to submit that and go try and get a job at Bethesda Softworks in Rockville, Maryland, where I lived at the time. But as we sort of continued to hit milestones with 20XX, we would get a sort of influxes of fans, influxes of money from people buying the game. That sort of convinced us, we could really take this 2 steps further and do X, Y, and Z, or it'd be really great if we added this feature, or our fans are really looking for us to do this with the game. Let's go ahead and do that, and we'll be just a little more professional, a little better feeling. And that sort of snowballed, and we ended up being in early access for 2.5 years, a little bit longer actually, before 1.0, and even after 1.0. We spent a good long while we were porting the game to consoles, also making a couple of major content patches for the game. So we just ended up working on it for a ton of time. So the question was about Capcom and about sort of threat of lawsuit, or did we think we were in sort of legal jeopardy? And what I'm trying to say is we started so low stakes, and my intentions for the game were so kind of low scope at first that we sort of got more serious about it as the stakes became greater. So we assumed by the time we had hit, early access with 20XX 1.0, if Capcom were going to say something about us, they probably would have. We think we're in the legal clear here. We're not using any of their IP. We're not using any of their assets. We're not using their universe. We're not using the things that intellectual property typically covers. We have a blue shooting robot and a red sword swinging robot, and that's kind of it. And so we certainly hope. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer. And I don't work for a massive company, but I certainly would hope that if Capcom were going to reach out, going to say something, that they would have done it sometime before now, because that was 6 years ago.
Very true, very true. So, I guess talking a little more about the game, how did you decide to go with the whole roguelike setup? I guess 5 years ago, 6 years ago is when that whole, obviously it's been around since the 80s and whatnot, but I think it started making a lot of traction with games like Rogue Legacy and Faster Than Light. And, if you'd asked me 5-10 years ago, would that work for a Mega Man setting? I would have said, probably not. But, getting my hands on with this style mixed with that type of mechanics, it works so well. So, what was the driving factor to kind of move you in that direction?
Thank you so much. So the big kind of at the core, both Mega Man and Mega Man X kinds of games and roguelikes are really about pretty similar things in some respects. Both genres of games are really about sort of the power curve progression from beginning very weak. So obviously, you play a Mega Man game, you start with no powers, no armor parts, no nothing. Maybe you have a dash, maybe you have a charge shot, depending on the game you're playing. But most of the stuff you get over the course of your play of the game. In a roguelike, the same is true word for word, right? You start a roguelike with nothing, and as you play through one, you sort of amass power, you gain new mobility techniques, you get cool new ways to interact with the world. And so in that respect, the two genres really match up very well. A typical Mega Man game, despite not having permadeath, despite letting you try stages however many times you like, is a relatively short play start to finish. If you've played like one of the Mega Man X games before, if you're very familiar with it, you can finish one of those games in something like 40 minutes, an hour, something like that. And so the overall time of play also actually matches up with a roguelike really well as well. Sort of the core difference there, of course, is the sort of feeling that when you play a Mega Man game or a Mega Man X game, you can learn the levels, right? You can fail at a certain point, learn from your mistake, and get to try that specific exact challenge again, which of course is something that we didn't do with 20XX, and is sort of not the case in our traditional 30XX play modes. But we did actually just announce a new feature just last week, just on Thursday, that we're calling Mega Mode, which basically removes permanent death, removes levels changing from the equation. So the levels are still always randomly generated, but a level won't change until you beat it. So when you go to start a Mega Mode run, you're going to be faced with, basically it'll generate all the levels up front right at the beginning, and then you can do them in whatever order you want, but they won't change until you actually finish them. So if you die, instead of your whole run being wiped out like in a traditional roguelike, like a Binding of Isaac or a Spelunky, instead you're going to come back to HQ. You might be able to spend some currency you found on some cool upgrades that'll maybe give you a better shot next time. And then you can either try that exact same level again, or you can try a different stage and maybe get a different power, get a little more currency before you try the stage that you flubbed on again. So you have a lot more sort of freedom. It's a little bit of a lower stress way to play through the game.
Nice, yeah, and I can see. I imagine that increases the replayability of it because in a traditional Mega Man game, your goal is to, get through it as fast as possible, maybe not die, try to find the optimal weapons to find and collect in a certain order. But in here, you don't really necessarily have that because a lot of that's random. So I imagine that a lot of players really appreciate that because they don't feel like once they've beat the game because they can always experience something new every playthrough. So I especially like hearing about that new feature we're talking about where levels will actually stay the same. So
they're still randomly generated. You'll still have that awesome, unique situation set of having the levels change every time you start a new full Mega Mode run, but you still get the parts that some players are looking for where permadeath is removed, where you get a chance to try a level a couple of times if you're not able to make it through.
So regarding how like I've never looked into the development of how roguelites work, so I'm kind of curious. How do
Sure.
the level designs work? Because is it like an AI that's taking all the art assets of that particular level's tile set essentially and putting it together in a way that's still playable under certain rules, or are you building like certain screens and it's calculating the best way to put those together that still allow for the player to actually complete through a screen? How exactly does that work?
Yeah, so there are a number of ways to make this kind of system work. So you can sort of see, imagine a spectrum of control that the algorithm puts on what it generates. So a very low level of control would be, literally the game building itself or the level building itself like platform by platform, jump by jump. Where literally it only knows what the individual next movement for the player is going to be when it's deciding what to do. And sort of a really high level of control would be, no randomness at all, where the entire thing is all laid out and there's no generation happening whatsoever. So I think most roguelike approaches are going to find themselves somewhere in between these two things. So in 20XX and also 30XX's case, the way it works is we sort of define the closest in the set of options that you sort of presented to describe it would be we sort of semi-define what a screen of the game would look like. We call it a chunk, and a chunk is basically one contiguous block of map data that sort of contains a room or a couple of rooms, so that we can sort of have a couple of cohesive platforming challenges or cohesive combat challenges, so that it doesn't feel like the game is just, throwing complete like chaos vomit at you of whatever it can think of to do. And so we define one of these rooms, and then the game will basically have different phases that these rooms are assigned to. So a good example of this would be in the Burning Temple theme, which is actually not one of the themes that's available in the demo here. Every playthrough of a Burning Temple stage will start with a couple of chunks in the open forest area where there's no ceiling. The platforming is relatively light. You're always going to see these sort of lush forest backgrounds, and then you move into what our fans call the Indiana Jones segment, where a big rollster wheel will chase you through a narrow corridor, and then if it's still alive when you get there, you'll battle it as a mini boss. And then you have an intense temple platforming section, and then the boss. And even though the Burning Temple is always going to follow that skeleton, the actual chunks it throws at you every time you go through it are going to change every time. So you'll sort of get this feeling of stage identity. And from seeing the tile sets, from knowing where the mini boss is, you're going to have a sense of how far you've gotten in the level. But the chunks that are being thrown at you each time are still going to be random. And so we build stages by basically, we have sort of defined stuff on our end that says, this is kind of what a Burning Temple stage should look like. We should have 3 forest chunks and then 2 chase chunks and then a rest chunk after the mini boss, and then maybe 4 temple chunks, 1 of these challenge chunks, and then let's do the boss. And so at runtime, the game sees this skeleton and says, okay, I have an idea of what pieces I need to pull out of the bag to stitch this stage together. And then it will reach into the bag for each of those phases, find pieces that sort of fit that description, fit that level layout, and then stitch them all together and present the player with a level. So obviously games will take lots of different approaches to level generation, but that one is ours.
That's really neat. Now, I noticed when I was playing through the demo, I occasionally saw similar sections in different playthroughs. So I figured they had to be sort of somewhat predefined in a way and just kind of stitched together. So it's really interesting. Thank you for walking through how that works. I definitely have to look into that a little more. That's fascinating.
It's really cool tech. Lots of different designers have put out sort of different talks, different explanations of kind of how they do their thing, because this kind of random generation works with a lot of different sorts of games too, right? Like people will do it for top-down dungeons, they'll do it for hack and slash. I've seen people do random generation for board games, which is really cool. There's lots of really cool stuff there. I love unique situations. I love sort of procedural generation. It's a big love of mine.
So I guess let's talk a little more about 30XX. So tell us about the characters. Obviously, I've seen in some other reviews and whatnot of the game that the characters are a little different this time around in terms of the way that they're going to kind of be controllable. Can you talk us through how that's going to be a little different this time around to give them a little more of a unique twist?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of character differences in 30XX, so in the first game, Nina and Ace have different primary weapon sets that are their basic attacks. All of Ace's attacks are melee, even if he switches it up to a spear or an axe from his sword. All of Nina's shots are ranged one way or another, but they have the same set of boss powers in the first game. So by the end of a run, they'll end up feeling pretty similar to one another. In 30XX, both characters have unique, entirely distinct power sets, so they get different moves from bosses and they use them differently. So Nina still has her energy resource that she has to manage for her powers from bosses, but she can combine any 2 of her powers together in power fusion to basically produce sort of unique combo effects from stacking 2 of them together, while Ace has a whole bunch of techniques that sort of all are bound to the controller all at the same time for him. And he has a quickly regenerating style gauge instead. So instead of having to sort of conserve this energy resource, he's more concerned with sort of only his moment-to-moment energy because he doesn't need to sort of collect pickups to restore it. And so they play very differently.
Nice. So I guess since we're kind of coming up on the end of this interview, is there anything else that you would like to tell anyone who watches this interview about the game and anything else fascinating you want to tell us?
Yeah, of course. The big boilerplate stuff. If you like the sound of 30XX, if you want to know more about it, the best ways to stay informed are to follow us on Twitter at Batterystaple_G. That's Batterystaple_G because I'm kind of bad at social media. Check out our Discord community at discord.gg/20xx. Follow the game on Steam or wishlist the game on Steam. Just search for 30XX on Steam. Those are all the great ways to sort of get more information on sort of what we're up to. So if you want to be the first to know when we have an early access date, or if you want to participate, we're going to do a closed alpha toward the end of this year. where we're going to invite a few of our fans to come in and sort of check out where we are before we go into early access. Those are the best ways to sort of keep in touch and make sure that you're able to hear that news when we finally get there.
Well, that is certainly exciting to hear. So, thank you for your time. I hope the rest
Of course, likewise.
your PAX Online goes well, and we'll definitely provide all those links out and hopefully tell more people about this game. Thank you for your
Fantastic.
time.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. This was fun.
All right, thanks, and have a great evening.
Cool. Take care. Bye, guys.